So, this year has been pretty shit. Because of this damn pandemic, I haven't been able to see the movies I wanted to see. I was particularly looking forward to seeing Dune, The Green Knight, and Last Night in Soho, which is a new movie by Edgar Wright. But I guess I'll see them later this year, or whatever. As for 2020, I still managed to see 65 movies. And instead of doing a video for the top 20 and then a separate video on everything leading up to them, I just decided to do it all in one video, so please watch the whole thing, please. So I'm going to be talking about the top 20 first, and then I'll talk about every other movie starting from the bottom. So, yeah. Okay, let's do this. Number 20 in my top 20 list is Da 5 Bloods, directed by Spike Lee. This is very notable among Spike Lee's works on a visual level because I believe this is the first film he's done that isn't set in an urban city. As a film, I have my definite problems with it. I didn't really care for the final conflict because it felt like there was a better way to end the story, and at that point I sort of lost my emotional investment. And then I have some nitpicks over Spike Lee's editing style, like the way he'll play multiple takes of a single moment. But as a whole, the movie works very well. It feels like a classic adventure story while still being infused with a modern political personality that covers the aftermath of the Vietnam War and the people it's affected, from the veterans to the Vietnamese people. Besides that, the movie looks great, it's written very well despite that final bit, and the cast is very, very good. Chadwick Boseman, Jonathan Majors, and Isaiah Whitlock Jr., I think his name is. They were all great, but Delroy Lindo is the standout. Number 19 is Bad Education. This is a movie about two superintendents, played by Hugh Jackman and Allison Janney, who are trying to get the school they work for as the #1 school in the country or something. But then you find out that they've been stealing millions of dollars from the school. So it becomes this rabbit hole of a movie where you basically watch the world these people made for themselves collapse. And it's very effective by the end. Jackman and Janney are both great, and they sold their characters very well. The script is very well written, and overall it was very entertaining and interesting. Number 18 is a horror movie on Netflix called His House. It's about a refugee couple who are given the chance to live in England, and they have to live in this rundown house, but it turns out that the ghosts of the people they left behind have followed them, and they start to haunt them. I think the horror aspects fizzled out by the end, and I wasn't a fan of the design of the end monster. It looked very uninspired to me. But this film has a really strong thematic story about the survivor's guilt these two people experience, as well as their struggle to adapt to a new culture after going through so many horrible things. And it also has a really good, effective twist that makes you go back and look at the movie in a completely different perspective. Number 17 is Nomadland, directed by Chloe Zhao. This is currently the frontrunner to win the Oscar for Best Picture, and I can see why. This is a beautiful looking movie with Frances McDormand giving a great natural performance, and it's all worthy of recognition. I'm not going to say this film is a masterpiece, though, because there are issues with it, especially with the pacing and the lack of emotional drama. There are scenes where the movie is trying to be emotional, but it just doesn't work for me. That being said, it's kind of hard to criticize a movie like this because it's more of a documentary than a traditional film. Basically, the movie is centered on this community of nomads, and besides Frances McDormand and one other guy, everyone else in the movie is an actual nomad. They talk about their lives, how they started traveling, what they're going through, and it really lifts the film up. Scenes will sometimes feel slow, but they always remain interesting because you know you're watching someone whose life is actually like this. Not a masterpiece for me, but it is overall very good. And if it wins all the Oscars, which it probably will, then I won't disagree. Number 16 is Tenet, the newest movie from Christopher Nolan. It is not his best work, and a large part of that has to do with Nolan being more dedicated to the film's central concept and style rather than the characters. Not only that, but these are probably the weakest characters Nolan's ever written, but that doesn't really matter because the movie is still fantastic. Anything Nolan does is so full of ambition and hard work that it's easy to look past the flaws and see it for what it's really trying to do. And in this case, it's Nolan putting his own spin on the spy genre, particularly the old Bond movies, which didn't have a strong emphasis on characters themselves. The action sequences are some of the best Nolan has ever done. The plane scene, the final battle, even just the fight where one person is going forwards in time and the other's going backwards. It's all so incredibly riveting and unique, and it all just makes me appreciate the pure effort Nolan put into this. Number 15 is an animated film called Wolfwalkers. It's not groundbreaking on a story or an animation level. In fact, it's a little reminiscent of things like How to Train Your Dragon, but it's still absolutely beautiful. The hand-drawn animation is in a sense timeless, and there's so much personality to it. Everything from the characters to the look of the world has this engrossing mysticism and storybook feel to it. It's basically a giant visual treat of a fantasy film. And I criticize the story, but it's still well done. You still feel for the characters and all that. Basically, it doesn't do anything new, but it does everything right, if that makes sense. Another Round is a movie from Denmark, and it is number 14 on my list. It's about a bunch of guys going through a midlife crisis and deciding to do an experiment that pretty much gives them an excuse to become alcoholics. This is an excellent comedy drama that has a very realistic and gritty feel to it. The comedy and the drama are so interlinked with each other that you can almost never have a definite feeling towards particular scenes. You're either laughing or crying or both. In addition, the movie looks great. Mads Mikkelsen gave a really wonderful performance, and I just love the dance he does. Number 13 is Pieces of a Woman. It kind of suffers from the fact that the first 30 minutes are extraordinary, and for the remaining 90 minutes it never really reaches that momentum again. I also think there are some scenes where the film is trying too hard to be dramatic and it kind of takes you out of it, but as a whole it works as a very emotional, quietly intense and minimalistic drama about a group of people experiencing grief in differing ways. The film is beautifully shot, all of the acting is fantastic, and I thought the arcs of the two main characters were very well done. Even in the bits where the film was trying too hard, they still kept the whole thing grounded and effective. It's probably not for everyone, but I would still recommend giving it a watch. Number 12 is The Climb. I heard a lot of great things about the film before I saw it, so I kind of built it up in my mind that I was going to be watching a masterpiece, and I was a bit disappointed when it wasn't. But don't get me wrong, this is still an incredibly well made and super funny movie. It basically follows this dysfunctional friendship over a period of years, and whenever they move forward in time, you always buy the changes the main characters go through. They gain weight, they lose weight, they grow beards, things like that, and it never looks fake. In addition, you have all these wonderful single take scenes that look and feel so seamless. It's honestly inspiring. It's a very good movie that's just like a hair away from being something great, and I'm really looking forward to what these guys do next. I think they're incredibly creative and absolutely hilarious. Number 11 is a foreign film called Bacurau. I don't think I can talk about the plot without spoiling it. This is basically a pure genre movie. For the first hour, it plays with your assumptions and expectations on what it exactly is. You'll constantly be asking, is this a thriller? Is it horror? Is it sci-fi? And by the second hour, you realize that it's kind of all those things rolled into one. But this film isn't just like a bunch of schlock. It has a real thematic core about how small, foreign, poor communities are seen and treated by the rest of the world, and that theme is especially emphasized by how the characters are more defined as groups than individuals. Not that they don't give the members distinct personalities, but for the most part, they're identifiable mainly through their associations with each other. It's basically a Twilight Zone version of Parasite, and as that, it's awesome. Starting off the top 10, we got Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, based on the play by August Wilson. Movies based on plays, for me, they have to be really well thought out in terms of pacing and visual presentation in order to work, and this film hits both of those marks very, very well. It looks great, it never feels stagey in spite of basically being set in just like a handful of rooms. It's very tightly paced as well, and the ending scene, which was made specifically for the movie, added a whole new level of tragedy to the original ending. The acting, of course, is amazing from everybody involved. Viola Davis is fantastic as always, and then of course Chadwick Boseman. His performance in this film is very special because, one, it's sadly his last, years. And 2, it's his best work ever. This might sound indelicate, but he really went out on top, and I genuinely hope he gets the Oscar. Like, I legitimately want him to win. He's the heart and soul of the movie. He deserves it. Number 9 is Time, which is a documentary that follows a family being affected by the US prison system and how the mom fought to get her husband released. I love the black and white cinematography, and the documentary has a wonderful cinematic feeling to it, but the main draw is the real life story it tells about this family. I've read some negative audience reviews that say shit like, do the crime, do the time, or they deserve it. Basically because the mom and dad ended up in prison for robbing a bank. First of all, the reason why they did it is clearly explained, and while not agreeable, it's still understandable. And secondly, the family doesn't try to justify their actions. What they instead bring up is how excessive and messed up the prison system is, and how it's adversely affected them for over 20 years. And it's done in a way that doesn't feel preachy or self-righteous in any way. It's all about this family wanting to become whole again, and in spite of the mistakes they made, you feel for these people, and you hope that they end up all right. Overall, very well done. Number 8 is Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always, directed by Eliza Hittman. This is a film about a girl who goes from Pennsylvania to New York to get an abortion. Based on that plot description, you may have some very strong ideas of what the film entails, but the film is very mature. It never bogs itself down by being an anti-abortion movie or a pro-abortion movie. It addresses both sides of the argument, but it remains neutral throughout. Because ultimately, it's not about the politics of abortion. It's a character study of this girl, Autumn. You learn a lot about her as the film goes on, especially in this one really effective scene where the title comes from, and ultimately you can either agree or disagree with what she's doing, but regardless you can still understand why she's doing it, if you're a rational person. The actress who plays Autumn, Sydney Flanagan, is excellent, and overall it's a very good movie that respects you enough to handle a really tough subject matter without bias, and for that I think it's a huge achievement and I highly recommend it. Number 7, we got Sound of Metal, which is an excellent movie about a drummer who loses his hearing and tries to come to terms with it. It explores the topic of hearing loss very well, and it showed just how much of a struggle it can really be. But it doesn't try to tell this like cheap, cheesy, cliche story about how deafness is overcome. It's very layered and very grounded, and because of that, the emotional scenes hit a lot harder. The main character, the drummer Ruben, he makes all of these choices, and you stick with him and hope that everything will work out, and by that same logic, you feel the lows he feels when they don't. All of the acting is great, especially Riz Ahmed, who plays Ruben, and Paul Raci, who plays the mentor character, Joe, and the sound design really took the film to another level, and it made me all the more invested because it really put me into the situation that Ruben was experiencing. It's such a sad movie, in a good way though, and by the time it ended, I just felt really moved in a way I can't exactly explain. Number 6 is Pixar's Soul. I am shocked that I like it so much, let alone the fact that I got into the top 10, because when I first saw the trailer, I thought it looked good, but it also seemed a little bit too similar to Coco and Inside Out, but having now seen it, I honestly think it's better than Coco and Inside Out. The animation is once again beautiful. I would say it's Pixar's best looking film to date. On top of that, Pixar once again managed to find the perfect balance where both kids and adults can enjoy this film. There are tons of fun characters, the great jokes. You can tell Tina Fey got to write in some stuff, but I think adults will get more out of this than kids because the story is very mature. The story of a guy being separated from his body and being able to look at his life through the lens of a midlife crisis brings up a lot of topics which adults are more likely to fully understand than kids. Without spoiling it too much, it all leads to this revelation scene for Jamie Foxx's character. It's purely visual, and it is so beautiful and so emotionally stirring. It's basically the most emotional scene I've seen in a Pixar movie since Up. Also, before I forget, the music by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross is simply amazing. It's easily the best score of the year. As for criticisms, the only ones I basically have are just nitpicks. So yeah, Love the movie. Number 5 is First Cow, directed by Kelly Reichardt. When I first saw it, I couldn't help but be reminded of Jim Jarmusch's Dead Man. A lot like that film, First Cow is this revisionist take on the Western genre, with a duo of protagonists who are pretty atypical. I've criticized a lot of movies this year for being too slow with their pacing, but here that use of slow pace is perfect, especially for the last third. Kelly Reichardt is known for making slow movies, so she knows how to keep scenes interesting even though they take their time. This film has an incredibly immersive world and atmosphere, very likable and well-acted characters, and a story that you don't see a lot in westerns, but it manages to fit into the genre perfectly. And also, I like cows, so I thought the cow was cute. Small Axe is a collection of 5 films directed by Steve McQueen. Some people are counting it as a TV show, others are counting the films individually. I'm just gonna put the whole collection of films down as number 4. The films are basically period pieces about the lives and civil rights struggles of West Indian immigrants in Great Britain. They all tackle different times and subjects, but put together, Small Axe is collectively about the real-life struggles this community had to face through the years. It's very interesting because as an American, I didn't know any of this stuff, and it has this type of educational value to it. Like, I can see this being played in British schools for history classes. All of the performances in each of the films are great, especially John Boyega and Letitia Wright, and I love how McQueen tries new stuff visually with each entry, but he always keeps to his methodical and level-headed vision to keep them from becoming something different. Out of the 5 films, I would say that Mangrove is the best, but I would still highly recommend watching all of them. They're so good. Number 3 is Mank, directed by David Fincher. I've heard some fair criticisms from other people, like how the film doesn't really have any obstacles and that the story is thin, but for me, it's one of the most entertaining movies of the year. I was worried that it was gonna just be about the making of the script for Citizen Kane, which had already kind of been done before, but what the film does instead is really interesting. It focuses on Herman Mankiewicz, the person, and it follows him, 1, as he's writing Citizen Kane, and 2, as he basically exists within 1930s Hollywood, where there was a lot of political shadiness and greedy studio figures like Louis B. Mayer. Basically, the film is all about Mank's world, as well as how he functions in that world and how he reacts to it in the form of writing Kane. And as that, I thought it was great. Gary Oldman, Amanda Seyfried, and Charles Dance are all great. And the guy who plays Orson Welles, I don't know his name, but he's like the perfect Orson Welles dead ringer. I especially love the way the movie is made to look like something that was made during the 1930s or 40s, right down to the sound sort of being muffled, and it doesn't feel gimmicky or anything like that. It just really helped me sort of love the movie more. Also, Bill Nye is in it, so of course it's great. Number 2 is Minari, a beautifully done and heartwarming coming-of-age story about a Korean-American family trying to fulfill their American dream. I don't really have any complex reasons why I like it so much. I just think that for what it's going for, it's perfectly done. All of the acting is great. Literally everyone is great. I can't think of anyone who stands out. There's a great balance between comedy and drama, and I think they really nailed the family dynamics. The dad wants to become a successful farmer, while the mom is more concerned with providing for the kids, and then the kids are basically just trying to adapt to their new home while also bonding with their grandma. And in the midst of all that, conversations are brought up over whether their American dream is possible without essentially drifting apart from each other. All of this stuff is done in a way that felt natural, and it always led to funny scenes being hysterical and dramatic scenes to being really anxiety-inducing. It's just such a well-made movie, and it manages to tell an uplifting story without feeling cheesy or pandering, and I thought it was excellent for that. And taking the top spot as my favorite film of 2020 is I'm Thinking of Ending Things, written and directed by Charlie Kaufman. I'm not going to say anything about the story. Charlie Kaufman, for those of you who don't know, is one of the boldest filmmakers today. I've pretty much loved everything he's ever been involved with, adaptation, being John Malkovich, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, Anomalisa. Now we get this, which is one of the most provocative and emotionally challenging films I've seen in a long time. Everything about it is so meticulously put together and flawless, including and especially the uneasy atmosphere and the great acting from everyone involved. It's a really slow and uncomfortable movie to watch as a whole, but it's done in a way that's intentional. Basically, it's like watching someone being stuck in a claustrophobic version of Limbo that's sad, funny, and terrifying at the same time while becoming more and more dreamlike. And not only that, but you really do have to watch it multiple times just to pick up on the little clues and to get a better understanding of the meaning behind everything. I can completely understand someone not liking it or calling it pretentious, but for me, I was completely enthralled by this movie, and it has stayed with me ever since I saw it. In that way, it stands above everything else I've seen this year. I'd highly recommend watching this film, even though it's not for everyone, and I have no idea whether or not it will get more attention in the future, but regardless, it absolutely deserves it. The single most worst movie I saw in 2020 was Verotika. If you watch it, I swear to God, you'll think it was made by people who didn't know how to make a movie. It's like the real-life version of that show Garth Marenghi's Dark Place, that amazing show that was purposefully bad. Verotika is trying to be genuinely good, and the results are almost the exact same. Everything about it is just completely incompetent, from the acting to the writing to the directing to the makeup to the costumes to the everything about it sucked. It's just hilarious how much everything about it sucked. Artemis Fowl. I've never read the books, so when I heard about the bad reviews this movie was getting, I thought, ooh, this is gonna be funny. But no joke, the movie is just terrible. You can really tell that the production was just a giant mess. The writing is awful and cliche, the CGI looks unfinished, all of the acting is cringeworthy, and the editing is unforgivably bad. There's this character who's set up, and she consistently disappears from one scene and then shows up again in the middle of another scene. It's just a bunch of garbage. It's basically the 2020s version of The Last Airbender. There. I said it. Fantasy Island, a hilariously pathetic excuse for a horror movie. It tries to do what 21 Jump Street did, take an old dumb TV show and put a modern spin on it. This time they're doing it with like a horror twist. They completely failed. The movie has no intelligence, no tone, no atmosphere, and no entertainment value, because everything is done on the level of a dumb YouTube video. Not this one though. Please keep watching. Mulan. Not the original one from the 90s, sadly. It's the live-action remake. The weird thing is that even though I'm not a big fan of the original, this is so far the worst of the remakes Disney has done, because it doesn't even keep what made that one special. The original film is an empowering story about how Mulan was able to save China by not conforming to what was expected of her because of her gender. And the remake is literally about a superhero with magical abilities who's chosen by the gods to serve her country and the bureaucracy as a soldier. And it's like, why? The production is competent, but there's no style or energy to it. All of the action sequences are over-edited and lacking. The acting is really stale, especially from the woman who played Mulan. I was just completely bored with this movie because it had nothing to offer me that was fresh or exciting in spite of the changes made, and it didn't even keep what worked for the original. It's just a horrible movie. I really don't understand how this got good reviews. Like, are you guys okay? Dolittle, I did a whole review on this. The Night Clerk is hands down the most boring movie I've seen all year. The story is actually very simple, but it's told in the most drawn out way possible, so I really couldn't follow what was going on at all. On top of that, the acting is really goofy, and some actors are just straight up wasted. The Tax Collector, the newest masterpiece from Suicide Squad and Bright director David Ayer. This movie looked like a complete joke, but it feels like Ayer is trying trying to make this his masterpiece. The main character is actually named David. It's also incredibly bleak and violent to a point where it just becomes sad and disturbing in a bad way. It just lacks any actual quality whatsoever. The Last Thing He Wanted. This is the type of movie I think when I hear the term Oscar bait. This movie is also very boring and drawn out. It doesn't handle its story correctly, you barely have any idea what's happening most of the time. There really isn't anything about it that stands out, it's just really boring and bad. Bloodshot. This movie was stupid as hell. Spenser Confidential. I talked about this in my Netflix video. Unhinged. I wanted something like Death Proof. I wanted a bunch of craziness and Russell Crowe being a lunatic, and I got that sometimes, but otherwise the movie is sadly boring. The New Mutants is officially the last X-Men movie made by Fox. It was originally supposed to come out in like April 2018, but they kept delaying it. Now it's finally here and it's terrible. To be fair, there is some interesting character stuff, but the movie either switches between a bland teen movie or a boring horror movie. And I also found it ridiculous how the main villain is basically a giant CGI bear. Did they get Joaquin Phoenix to play him or something? Underwater. I appreciated the scale of it, but it was literally a watered down ripoff of Alien. That's all it was. Wonder Woman 1984. I wanted to like it, but it's just a giant mess. I enjoyed some stuff like Pedro Pascal's performance and Hans Zimmer's score, but it's so unnecessarily slow. Lots of plot details are convoluted, vapid, or confusing. The visual effects are bad, and the themes are pretty vague. It's like the truth is better or something. I'm not sure if the studio put their hands all over it or if the director had more creative control and just didn't know what to do with it, but honestly, with the way the movie ended up, I don't see the difference. Project Power. It's got an interesting premise, the visuals were pretty cool, and I really like the acting from Dominic Fishback. Otherwise, the movie is tone deaf and annoyingly generic, and I also didn't like the action sequences. They were either lackluster or very short. Birds of Prey. It was trying to be the good version of Suicide Squad, and I admittedly got cautiously optimistic for it, and there were things I liked, such as the costumes, the color palette, and the main villain, but the movie is pretty bad. The script is absolutely awful. The story is generic, the characters are uninteresting, and I don't think Harley Quinn worked as a protagonist. She was basically like this, just the dull version of Deadpool. I don't know why the writing here is so juvenile. The animated Harley Quinn show has so much more wit and entertainment value to offer than this movie. Just go watch that if you really want to watch something with Harley Quinn. Sonic the Hedgehog, based on Sonic the Hedgehog. It's a pretty bad movie on its own. It's basically Hop, the movie Hop starring Sonic, but if you had to watch it, you can get through it. It's actually not a bad movie to watch when you're drunk. On the Rocks, the newest movie from Sofia Coppola. Sadly for all the talented people involved, it's painfully boring. The Old Guard, it's got a good cast and an interesting concept, but overall it's pretty mediocre. The Half of It, I talked about it in my Netflix video. The Hunt, it's a political comedy action thriller, I guess. It's pretty slick in terms of pacing and entertainment value, but the action is pretty boring in execution, and the political humor really bogs the movie down. I saw a documentary on Robbie Robertson and the band called Once Were Brothers. I learned some stuff, but it was still very one-sided. Capone. It's a biopic that's very unconventional in its approach, which I really liked, but there just wasn't enough meat on its bones to make me care about what was going on. As for Tom Hardy's performance, I'm genuinely not sure if it's good or bad, because he really does go all over the place.
You fucking bum!
Fuck, jump right up in the
That was
fucking
mine!
boat.
That was mine!
Extraction, I talked about this in my Netflix video. I think I can say this is my guilty pleasure movie of the year. Call of the Wild, there's a lot to like about this movie. The visuals are pretty, Harrison Ford is really good, and it's enjoyable a lot of the time, but the fact that the main dog is CGI, and very unconvincing CGI at that, ruined the movie for me. I could never get into the story or the drama because I just kept thinking, wow, look at that CGI. That's pretty bad, isn't it? The King of Staten Island is fine. It's got good acting, some decent humor, and it's an overall interesting autobiographical story, but it was way too long and overindulgent for me. Onward, I appreciated that it came from a personal place, but it still felt underdeveloped. None of the characters are memorable, the humor wasn't as fun as it should have been, and I really didn't like the bright style setting where it's modern day life with fantasy creatures. Please stop, I don't want to see anything like that again. The Midnight Sky, directed by George Clooney. It's got good acting, a good score, and a nice emotional tone. I just thought it was overall lackluster. Run is a decent thriller overall. Sarah Paulson and Kiera Allen are both great, but I had a lot of issues with the movie's logic in certain scenes. Bill and Ted Face the Music. The Bill and Ted movies are essentially critic-proof. They're just silly and fun, and I love them for that. And this one totally lives up to the previous two. It does have problems, but at the end of the day, it's just so much fun. Color Out of Space is a decent Lovecraft adaptation. It captured the story's cosmic horror very well, and of course, I loved watching Nicolas Cage.
Okay, coming up! You what?
Okay, stop it! Stop it!
Slam dunk!
The Way Back. For the first 2/3, it's just a generic basketball drama. Ben Affleck's good, but the movie as a whole is really predictable. But the third act is really well done and realistic, and it ultimately kind of saves the movie from just being average. The Invisible Man. I really enjoyed the suspenseful and minimalistic atmosphere, and Elizabeth Moss was really good, but a lot like Run, it has those movie logic issues in some scenes where you'll go, huh? Wait, what? Why? True History of the Kelly Gang. It's a well-made period piece, it's got good performances and some nice visuals. It kind of gets ahead of itself style-wise, but otherwise it works. News of the World, same thing. It's a solid traditional western. It's got good acting, it looks great. Paul Greengrass really knows how to direct a movie, but at the same time, nothing is really done with it that makes it stand out in any way. A werewolf movie called The Wolf of Snow Hollow. I was kind of expecting a little bit more out of it. It's directed by a guy named Jim Cummings, and he directed this film Thunder Road, which is excellent. By comparison, Wolf of Snow Hollow goes in a lot of the same directions as Thunder Road, but it's not really as focused or as well done as it is in that. But everything Jim Cummings does well as a filmmaker is in this. The off-kilter comedy, the great acting, beautifully simplistic cinematography, and it's worth watching in the end. Palm Springs is a time loop comedy, a lot like Groundhog Day, but it manages to do enough of its own thing so that it's not a carbon copy of Groundhog Day. Andy Samberg and Kristen Milioti are both fantastic, and they have a lot of chemistry with each other. There are so many funny bits in the movie too. I think my favorite is just the concept of J.K. Simmons' character, where he's basically someone who's stuck in the time loop and he just keeps hunting down Andy Samberg and torturing him to death. I don't know why, but that's just hilarious to me. I didn't really care for the last third though. It basically just became another romantic comedy, but overall it's a good movie. The Vast of Night is a low-budget, independent, Twilight Zone-style movie. Some people might find it boring or niche, but I found it very engaging and entertaining. And in spite of its limitations because of the low budget, it's a very good movie, and I'm looking forward to what the director does next. The Devil All the Time. It's a very interesting, if not very morbid, collection of stories that explore violence and evil, and how it sort of passes on from generation to generation. It kind of requires multiple viewings to really appreciate. I didn't really care for it the first time I saw it, but it got a lot better the more times I watched it. The cast is absolutely fantastic, especially Tom Holland and Robert Pattinson. They also have the author of the original book narrate the film, which was a very unique thing to do. Kajillionaire is a quirky, unconventional crime comedy drama directed by Miranda July. I thought the pacing was a little too slow in the second act, but the acting is great. There's a very emotionally engaging story to keep you invested, and overall it's a very well made movie. Crip Camp. It's a really good documentary about this summer camp for disabled people and how these campers from the 70s went on to be involved in the disability rights movement. I don't really have anything else to say other than it's really good. The 40-year-old version, not the 40-year-old virgin, this is different. Before I saw it, I was expecting some type of rap comedy, but instead the movie turned out to be a satire of, for lack of a better word, the woke theater world, as well as a piece about artistic expression and staying true to your principles. What kind of ruined the movie for me was the pacing. At times, it's way too slow, and it felt like each scene could have been cut down by at least a couple of minutes. But other than that, the movie is very clever and smartly written and directed by Rada Blank. It has a lot of funny moments and some very nice uses of cinematography and editing. Borat's subsequent movie film. Not as fresh as the first one, some elements come off as dated, but it still had that politically / socially edgy humor to make it worth watching. Sacha Baron Cohen did a great job as usual, as did the woman who played Tudor, Maria Bakalova. It's really cool how she's able to match his level of commitment. The Trial of the Chicago 7. A lot of elements felt dated, especially the ending, which is kind of inspirational in a very over-the-top way, but the film is still completely entertaining. Aaron Sorkin gave the film his signature rapid-fire energy and wit, and it's always a joy to watch. The cast is excellent as well, and is filled with so many great actors who each get the chance to shine throughout. And number 21 is One Night in Miami, directed by Regina King. I have my little nitpicks here and there, but it's still a very entertaining and engrossing film. The 4 lead actors are all fantastic. I really liked the mature and energetic tone it had, and Regina King proved that she can really direct a movie. I hope she does a lot more great things in the future. So that's it. That's the movies I saw in 2020. Interesting year, wasn't it? Guess that's it.
You fucking bum! Stop it! That was mine! That was mine!